Welcome to the show, Ricki. For listeners that aren't familiar with Ricki's work, Ricki Heller is an RHN, holistic nutritionist, a PhD, whole foods chef, writer, educator who shares her sugar-free, gluten-free, allergy-friendly recipes and healthy living articles on her blog, rickiheller.com. She is the author of 2 best-selling books and her newest guide and cookbook, Living Candida Free, an associate editor at Simply Gluten Free magazine. Through her TV appearances, live presentations, and talks, Ricki shares her own story of learning how to thrive within an anti-Candida lifestyle and shows audiences how easy it is to eat well on a restricted diet, proving that a healthy lifestyle can indeed be sweet. Are you blushing yet, Ricki?
Whoa, well, thank you so much. Yeah, that makes me sound really good. Thank you.
Well, you are a pretty fantastic lady. I'm pretty happy to have you
No.
here. And you are the Candida expert. So I'm super excited to ask you a bunch of questions. We should just get right down to business if you're ready.
Sure, can't wait.
So, can you clarify for listeners what Candida is and what it does in the body?
Sure. So, Candida is actually a form of yeast that, and it's usually Candida albicans that lives in the body, and it actually lives in and on the body in all of the mucous membranes. So, in your digestive tract and in your eyes and in your nose, and also on the body. And normally, it sort of is one of a number of inhabitants of your inner ecosystem, and they all live in harmony together. But when the conditions change that allow the Candida to proliferate, which it does at the slightest provocation, then it grows out of control and it can mutate into a fungal form where it becomes dangerous for your health and it causes all kinds of varied symptoms that people can suffer from with Candida. So what it does is oftentimes will create a condition called leaky gut, where it basically has these kind of root-like extensions that bore right through the intestinal lining and create little ruptures that can allow undigested food to get into the bloodstream. That causes problems. And then you have a whole host of symptoms that are very familiar to people, which are things like, as you well know, we've both had this sugar cravings, intense sugar cravings, and all kinds of fungal infections are the 2 major ones. Plus, this concept that's referred to as foggy thinking or foggy brain, where people just can't focus, they just can't concentrate on things. And from there, you get satellite issues all over the whole body if it continues to go on after that.
Interesting. Okay, so because we're talking kind of about keto and candida, something that you just said resonated with me because a couple people in my keto group, and for people that don't know what keto is, maybe it's your first um, introduction to this. Basically, keto is a low carb, high fat approach to nourishing our bodies, where we basically starve our bodies of the glucose and then switch over to burning fats as energy instead of glucose as energy. So, in nutritional ketosis, our bodies become fat burning machines, basically, where we're breaking down fatty acids into ketone bodies that are used even by the brain as fuel. So, I started a Facebook group. There was a conversation in the Facebook group the other day where people were saying that they had really foggy brains after a couple months of being ketogenic. And so now I'm wondering, because your brain is supposed to get better on keto, if maybe there's some sort of interaction there. What are some of the symptoms of that foggy brain? Can you explain that a little bit more and what one would experience?
Yeah, because I never really understood it until it happened to me. And it didn't even happen to me right at the beginning when I had Candida. It took the second bout of Candida for me to experience this. It's literally feeling like you're thinking through a fog. So everything is, there's no sharpness or clarity to your thoughts. And your head, not like a sinus congestion kind of full, but almost like there's a curtain inside your brain. That's the only way I can explain it. And so for me, what happened was I started getting very frustrated because I've always had a really good memory and suddenly I couldn't remember things and I couldn't focus. Like if I was trying to write a blog post, which, or write anything, let's say something would normally take me 20 minutes to write a letter, it would take me an hour and I couldn't
Whoa.
keep track of my sentences. I would get to the end of a sentence and think, oh no, what am I supposed to do next? And I didn't realize how bad it was until it cleared up. And then all of a sudden it was like someone had taken a vacuum cleaner and cleared out the inside of my head. And all that fog and all that debris was just gone. And suddenly It's almost like the difference between an old photo that's a little blurry and a really new sort of technologically new, sharp photo where the edges are just sharp all of a sudden. So it's very subtle. And when people are experiencing it, they may not always realize it. They just are frustrated because they can't think as fast or as clearly as they used to.
Yeah, a lot of the women in my group were talking about their memories and just like
Mm.
they can't remember anything and they're okay, so we're going to chat about this a little bit later and how ketones and candida can work against one another, and we'll definitely get back to that brain fog piece cuz that I feel like that could be really huge.
Yeah.
So now that everyone knows what candida is, and I had no idea that it was something that was already on our body, it's just a matter of when it gets imbalanced.
Yeah.
Um, and we would love to hear your story, how you got to where you are. And I know that your journey will resonate with a lot of our listeners today.
Sure, I'd love to. So for me, I mean, I really think I was sort of beset by this. I'm going to say before birth, because apparently your mother transmits what's in, to the fetus, what's going on in
Yes.
her body. And my mother was diabetic, type 2 diabetic, and apparently had a hard time also with my pregnancy. So I may have inherited a little bit of that predisposition towards excess candida just from her. But even as a little kid, I mean, the two things that I associate for me the most with candida are fungal issues and sugar cravings. So I grew up in a house of bakers. There was always something homemade and baked in our house. And at age 6, I learned how to make chocolate chip cookies for the first time. And then I was off on a tear baking like as often as I could. My sisters and I, we used to fight for the beaters, after my mother made a cake or whatever. So always drawn towards sugary foods. And just to give you one little snapshot, in my when I was in university, I lived in residence as an undergrad. Turns out, of course, my roommate was sort of similar in terms of sugar addiction. So we would buy like bags of Quaker oat chocolate chip cookie mix, and we would just mix up the dough and eat it. Like that's how drawn to sugary things we were. That's what that would have been.
Amazing.
Yeah. So really horrible eating habits through most of my young life. And then when I was married in my 30s, I started having these recurrent yeast infections that nobody could get rid of. Even then, nobody thought that there could be any kind of special issue. They consider it superficial and not important. So they kept giving me creams. It didn't work. And then as I got older in my 40s, this is where it all kind of came to a head because I had 4 sinus infections in 3 months and I could not get rid of them. I had 6 courses of antibiotics. And so finally I thought, okay, I have to do something about this. I'm a little bit of a slow learner there. And I finally found a holistic doctor who diagnosed me and put me on the diet, and my sinus issues cleared up and I felt so much better. So that was actually my prompt to go to holistic nutrition school and learn more about the connection between food and health, because I wanted to know why did I have to follow this diet? What was it about the diet that would help my candida? And so from there, I just got better and better. And I was great for about, I'd say 10 years while I ate a completely, healthy, holistic diet. And I was feeling so good that I ended up, the Christmas of 2008, I thought, I'm just going to have a little piece of cake. I'm just going to have one piece of chocolate. And I'm talking about, with sugar in it.
Yeah.
And in very short order, like I'd say a couple of months, I was right back to my old eating habits. And I know, horrible. So I got this really awful rash on my chest and went to my doctor and she gave me a cream, but nothing would get rid of it, like nothing. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. And finally, I went back to the holistic doc, and it took sort of a conventional approach and a natural approach and the diet and all kinds of detoxification all together before I finally got rid of that. And that was started in 2009, which is when I started blogging about my journey with Candida on my blog. So everything since 2009 on my blog is related to an anti-Candida diet, sugar-free, gluten-free, and also plant-based. And that was how I cleared that up this second time. But one of the things I learned through this experience was that when you have Candida, when you've had it once, you're more prone than the average person to get it again, to have a relapse. So you really do have to maintain a healthy diet. And if you have a relapse, it's usually more virulent. So it's going to be stronger and it's going to be harder to get rid of the second time, and even more so the third time, fourth time, however many times you let this go on. So for me, that was a really tough lesson, but it was a good one that I know I can never again in my whole life eat white sugar, ever, ever, ever. And at first it was this whole mourning period, but you know what? Like as
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this before that, once you realize that you can still have delicious food within the boundaries of your dietary restrictions, then it doesn't feel like any kind of issue for me anymore. I still have my favorite desserts. They're just made out of ingredients that will not harm my body
And you're so good at making those beautiful foods that
now.
don't have that stuff in them. And when you start to see, like, it's one thing, when I was told I couldn't have gluten anymore, I was like, what do you mean? I don't even know what gluten is. And, like, what do you mean I can't have, like, how is there, I thought gluten was bread. So how is there bread in, like, desserts? I don't even understand how this works.
Right.
Or mashed potatoes. And so
Yeah.
by seeing images, like, on your website, rickiheller.com, and everything that you put out there in your cookbooks and guides, it makes it so much more attainable for people when you can see that visual of like, oh my gosh, okay, I still can have all these things. If you're the type of person where you've had candida, and I know I've been one of those people, you have to, like you said, it's a lifelong eating style, and that it doesn't have to be a sentence. you know
Absolutely.
so what kinds of foods do people have to cut out if they're on this anti-candida diet?
Well, there are stages, but in the first stage is the strictest, where you give up basically anything that has sugar or will be easily converted to sugar. So white sugar, white flour, white rice, white potatoes. Except in my book, Living Candida Free, we do allow red skin potatoes because those are less starchy than the other potatoes. But otherwise, potatoes. And then you want to give up any foods that are high, that are naturally high sugar, like fruits as well. So except for lemon, lime, and avocado and cranberries, which are very, very low sugar. You also want to eliminate any moldy foods. So things like mushrooms, peanuts. Peanuts and pistachios are the two nuts with the highest mold content. So those are out. And fruit is out anyway, but I was always surprised to discover that melons are very high in mold on the skins.
Yeah, they
So,
are. Totally, they
yeah,
are. It's
yeah.
scary.
I know, and citrus fruits too, unfortunately. So those things, then, and anything that's going to stress out the immune system, because you want to really boost your immune system and help it and support it so it can fight the candida. So anything that's like a common allergen, so dairy, eggs, citrus is another one there. If you eat animal products, you can't have things like shellfish. Red meat and coffee, I'm sorry to say, because they're acidic, which is what candida loves. It loves an acidic environment. And then I just had another one on the tip of my tongue. Initially, like anything with caffeine. So there's a whole host of foods. And people often will say to me, if I start rhyming off what you can't eat, they'll say, well, what can you eat?
Yeah.
But there's so much left. There's vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, legumes. If you eat animal products, you can have some forms of animal protein. So there's lots.
That's really interesting. Something that you mentioned. I've been looking a lot more at mycotoxins lately and the molds and stuff that grow on our foods. And it's, I actually posted on my Instagram the other day, quite some time ago now, I guess, but coconut oil and coconut products. I was listening to a
Yeah.
podcast, I believe Bulletproof Radio, and he was talking about coconut milk. And I've always reacted to the coconut milk that I keep in the fridge for a day. But when
Yep.
I first open up a can of coconut milk, no problem. But the next day, I react to it. And I was reading that it's actually coconut milk grows a lot of bacteria or fungus or
Fungus.
those mycotoxins really quickly. And so that's why people are reacting to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've had that type of reaction to certain foods. Like I know when I've had foods that I know have mold on it, I get really tired and lethargic, or I have a hard time breathing. Like I get wheezy.
Yep.
And that was helpful in my candida process.
Yeah, and you know what's so interesting to me about the mycotoxins is that with like peanuts and pistachios, it's right there on the nuts, and it's
Yeah.
just to some extent it's on all, like the aflatoxins on peanuts. They're on all nuts and grains as well, apparently dried, like anything dried like that. But the thing is, peanuts and pistachios are just so much higher than the others, so that's why, because you could cut out all nuts, and some of the candida diets do. But what I find so interesting about the coconut milk, and I actually saw that on your Instagram, is that coconut contains antifungals. It's often used in candida because it's so antifungal. So it makes me wonder if it's how they process it or something that the fungus gets in there, right?
I'm
Um,
learning that there's only 4 different places where coconut oil is made. And
wow.
there, yeah. So if you're reacting to one coconut oil, you'll react to most of them because there's only like 4 places. But I'm trying to find a coconut oil that is, yeah, I think the processing definitely plays a part to maybe perhaps there isn't as much antibacterial properties in certain types of coconut oil, even though they
Yeah.
claim that there is, because I agree with you. Why the heck isn't the coconut oil just killing off these things? So
Yeah.
it's definitely worth, and it's cool that you mentioned too, a lot of the things that you eat on an anti-candida diet would also be really good with the keto practices, even if you're doing a plant-based keto practice, like your vegetables, fiber, you mentioned like oils and fats and nuts and seeds that don't have those toxins on them. So if you, I know that you follow a diet that's vegan and lower carb. Can you tell us how you came to eat this way and how it relates to your candida?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, the early stages is very low carb anyway, because you don't want those carbs to convert to glucose in the blood and spike your blood sugars and feed the candida. So initially, I was only eating one grain, and it was a very specific lower carb, like the seed-like grains, like buckwheat and quinoa and amaranth. One
Okay.
serving of those a day, and one serving of legumes a day. So I would have chickpeas or something like that. And as I went on, I reintroduced more of those. But because I'm primarily, I guess, still a baker, I was kind of waiting for the stage where I could get flour products back in, because since flour is more processed than the straight up grain, I saved the flour for stage two. And as I just went on, I realized the more I ate of the flour products and the more grain servings I had in a day, that would sometimes flare my symptoms, because I might have had too much, or if I had grains too many times in a week, it would flare my symptoms. So I just decided, I should say refined grains like pasta or something like that. So I just decided that to see what would happen if I cut back a little bit and went back to really the equivalent of stage one on the anti-candida diet, which is where I probably spend, I'd say 80% of my eating time now. I've cut back my fruit as well. And I just find that my symptoms are gone when I do that. But if I increase that too much, I do get a flare up of that rash that I had sometimes. And I just don't feel as good in general. So for me, it's just a matter of following what seems to work best with my body.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like also similar. You were talking about the similarities in the diets, and paleo is also very similar, right?
Yeah, exactly. So by, you're saying like I wasn't eating as many grains, I wasn't um, having as much fruit. So would fat have played a pretty big role in your candida protocol, or how did that go for you?
It did at the beginning. And again, when you're on stage one, because when I go lower grain, I tend to increase my fat content. And so there was a period when, particularly when I was testing for my book, because I wanted I wanted all of the recipes in Living Candida Free to be accessible to stage one, because that's the hardest stage, and that's when people are buying books that they want to help them on the anti-candida diet. So I think it's like 97 out of the 100 recipes are okay for stage one. And of
Nice.
course, and they're also okay for every other stage. But so for me now, and I ended up eating a lot of those kinds of foods in a day. And when I go grain free, I need to watch, because if I have too many nut based products, and on top of that coconut oil, and on top of that coconut milk, which I tend to do if I'm having dessert as well, then I find that's a little bit too much fat for me in a day. And that's when my candida symptoms can also flare, interestingly.
So interesting that you say that. So to get back to our the whole mind fog thing, what I'm finding is that if you have a history of candida, or you're healing yourself of candida, like you said in that stage one, by eating too many fats, you're not eating a lot of carbohydrates, you're eating a ton of fats, your protein is probably pretty moderate,
Yeah.
you are in ketosis. Or if your body is easily switched into that fat burning state. And what's interesting by you saying, I had a little bit of a flare up, I'm finding that people that become in that state of ketosis by creating those ketone bodies, the candida loves ketone bodies for fuel, just like it loves sugar. And so I'm wondering if people that are following a ketogenic eating style and they're getting a lot of ketone production, if they had a history of Candida or maybe didn't know that they had Candida, and then all of a sudden they're getting this brain fog that you're talking about and these other symptoms, which I'll ask you about too, and like what symptoms cause or are a signal of Candida. But there's definitely a link there. If you have Candida, perhaps keeping the ketone creation quite low. Like you said, there's that fine line between too much fat. When you're following this protocol, it's interesting to see the two tie together so synergistically.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I bet that is what is going on with me because I find I do much better if I'm grain free, if I increase my beans and legumes versus increase my fats. So that's
Okay.
interesting. Yeah.
Okay. So for people that are thinking, oh my gosh, like maybe I have this Candida thing, or maybe I don't know. What kind of symptoms are associated with this? How do we know?
Well, we've talked about a couple. So brain fog for sure. But the number one symptom that most people have is sugar cravings or carb cravings, like really overwhelming, not your average once a month kind of cravings, but the kind where, you're willing to go out in your pajamas at a quarter to midnight to the gas station to buy something sweet, like that.
Totally guilty. I have done that.
I'm sure I've done that too, for sure. Or no, you know what? I just make it because I can make
Yeah,
it.
screw it. I'm not going out. Make me a cake at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and I've done it for sure. We used to have a recipe in our house that my sisters and I all knew because from start to out of the oven, it was less than 30 minutes. And so you could be eating it in less than 30 minutes, right? But anyway, so that's what they do. They're like really, really intense sugar cravings. And then all of those symptoms that are associated with yeast. So vaginal yeast infections, jock itch, fungal rashes, toenail fungus of any kind, athlete's foot, all these things that are connected to fungus in some way or not or another that doesn't clear up in the normal way. So, people who I have a client who's had yeast infections for like a year or something, and every 2 weeks it just keeps coming back. And that's what happened to me in my 30s as well. Or you have some kind of a rash, like my rash that wouldn't go away. So that's that. And then as I was saying earlier, it can also lead to leaky gut. And so some of the complications of that are obviously digestive issues and lots of gas and bloating. And constipation is a big one that goes with that. And allergies, undetected food allergies are another big one that's kind of a consequence of the leaky gut. So all kinds of things. It can go on beyond that, but once you get to a certain stage, you start getting symptoms in all other parts of the body. But those are the main ones initially if you're concerned.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for all listeners out there that are thinking, oh my gosh, okay, wow, I maybe have Candida, what can they do?
There are lots of things you can do. I mean, you can certainly go to a naturopathic doctor or a holistic nutritionist, or if you can find a functional medicine doctor, and they can test you. There are all kinds of tests they can do. There's a blood test, there's a urine test, there's a stool test, and there's also a saliva test. But the one test that people may have heard about online that you can do at home, and I was very skeptical of this test until I did it when I was having a huge flare up, and it actually correlated perfectly with my symptoms. So I would say for me, this test was accurate. What you do is first thing in the morning, when you wake up, you have a small glass of water by your bedside. And it's about half full, or you can just go and fill one. But don't brush your teeth. Don't eat anything. Don't drink anything before you do this test. It's got to be fresh saliva first thing in the morning. And you build up a nice ball of spit, and you just spit into the glass. And then you watch what the saliva does on the water. So normal, healthy saliva is clear and it will float on the water. And if you go back 15 minutes later, it'll still be floating. And if you go back 30 minutes later, it'll still be floating. But if you have Candida, what often happens is it will start to grow what look like roots going downward towards the bottom of the glass. So roots or legs, they call it sometimes. You'll see these lines coming out of the saliva, and it'll look a little cloudy. And that's what happened to me until my symptoms cleared up, and then it got clear again. And for people who are very severe, who have very severe issues, your saliva will actually sink to the bottom of the glass because it's heavier. So you can look for that, and that's just kind of a quick and easy and free way to get a good sense of whether or not you're dealing with that. It's not 100% accurate either, but it's free. And if you have a positive result there, then you can go and talk to a professional and see, and maybe delve further at that point.
And so do you have a course that kind of walks people through how to deal with candida and such?
Yeah, so the Candida Kickstart, I began it because it's really the beginning of the diet and getting sort of in your groove on this diet. Because for some people, this can last 6 months to a year. And I don't want to scare people out there. There are people who are over and done with it in 3 months. But for someone like me who has a lot of symptoms and it's been going on for a long time, then you have to devote a long time as well to getting rid of it. And so it's getting into that groove and understanding the diet and learning how to cook this way and buy the ingredients and what is psyllium husk and what are chia seeds and all the things you need to gather. And so the Candida Kickstart is it's the better part of a month, and it's a course that actually walks you through all those different issues so that you can feel you have the foundation, you're confident in what to eat, and we have a meal plan, we have a shopping list, we have menus, and you get a copy of my book as well to walk you through what Candida is and give you more than 100 recipes that you can eat on the plan as well. But I found that once people feel they have that support, and exactly as we were saying earlier, they see that it's doable. There's tips about what do you do if you're invited to a party? What do you do if you go out to a restaurant? How do you live with this over the long term and not cheat? Because that's so essential. And I think most people fall off because they're at a loss of what to do, or they feel they're lacking the support around them with other people who are going through something similar. And so that's what the Candida Kickstart does. We have live support and often, where I answer questions and calls that people can listen to, and a group. To me, that's the most important thing. Like, from your community, your keto community, the group of people who are all going through something similar at the same time, that's where you get so much of your support too.
Oh,
So
it's
that's,
so powerful. Yeah,
yeah.
like it's amazing to see the women in my keto group now over, I think, at least 1,200 people in there. And
Wow.
they just all support each other back and forth and they're answering questions so much more. Like I'm just one person and I have one experience, but 1,200 women with all different experiences coming together, like that support in and of itself is
Yeah.
huge,
I
huge.
agree. Yeah, it's the support among each other. I think that's incredible, and sharing experience is so important. Yeah, I agree.
Exactly like what you've done for us today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your story and really providing our community with actionable steps to bring their health to that next level. Candida is something that I struggled with for a long time, and I know that you, like I said, you're the leader in all of this Candida stuff, and I'm so happy that you were able to share some tips. And I definitely think there's a connection between keto and Candida,
Oh,
and hopefully over the coming weeks and months, I can start providing some resources for people that, if they have that mind fog and maybe they have candida. So hopefully this call has been helpful for those
and
out there.
can I just say just really quick, if people would like a little more information, I've actually got a handout that I'd love to offer your audience if on Candida. It,
Yeah.
so I've set up a special page on my blog. It's rickiheller.com/healthful pursuit. And if you go there, you can sign up to get a handout called Consider Candida, and it just lists some of the 5 less common symptoms that people might miss. So if you think that you're dealing with this, that might be something that you want to look at there.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for putting that together.
Oh,
So
pleasure.
please go to rickiheller.com for any of those resources, and I'll include a link to that freebie below the video, on the blog post, and everywhere so you can access that. And again, thank you so much for being on the show today, Ricki.
Thank you so much, Leanne. It's been a pleasure.